Everyone wants to transform their home, but how come when you buy new furniture, hoping for that warm, fuzzy feeling, it never seems to work? Well, what if I told you there are better ways to transform your home than buying new furniture? Would you believe me? Let me explain. Most people try to change how their home looks, when they actually need to change how it feels. And new furniture almost never fixes that because furniture is just the last layer. It sits on top of decisions that were already made, like lighting, atmosphere, balance, and flow. So instead of buying more stuff and hoping your room finally clicks, what you should do is this. First, change the atmosphere so your space feels calm instead of flat. Second, give the edges of your room something to hold on to so it feels complete. Third, sharpen the details that define your space so nothing fades into the background. Fourth, open the room up visually so it feels nicer to live in. And finally, refine what's already there so everything settles into place. And if you watch this video all the way through, I'll walk you through each of these steps so you know exactly how to make your home beautiful. Let's get started. So if you just have one day to change how your room feels, lighting is where you'd start. Not furniture, not decor, lighting. Because light is what quietly controls the mood of a space, whether you realize it or not. And if you've ever walked into a room that felt flat or uncomfortable for no obvious reason, it's almost always a lighting problem. And usually it's the same setup every time. One overhead light, one brightness level, lighting everything equally. And when everything is lit the same way, the room stops feeling human and starts feeling clinical, like a waiting room or an office after hours. Not great, but that's why lighting changes work so fast, because you're not rearranging anything and you're not committing to new furniture, you're just changing how the room is experienced. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make here is thinking lighting is about brightness. So they add bigger fixtures with stronger bulbs and then wonder why the room still feels off. But what makes a space feel good isn't how bright it is, it's where the light lives and what it's asking your eye to pay attention to. Because a room starts to feel well designed when light comes from different places for different reasons. Because some light is meant to help you see, while other light exists purely to create depth. And the moment those roles are separated, your room stops feeling accidental. And this is why good lighting instantly calms a space down. Because when every surface is evenly lit, you don't know where to look, and you end up just scanning the room because nothing seems like the priority. But when light becomes selective, brighter light here and softer light over there, the room becomes easier to read, and you instinctively know where the room wants you to slow down. And this is especially important in spaces meant to feel restorative, like bedrooms, bathrooms, and living rooms, because these areas don't need visual excitement from gadgets or glowing objects. They need light that supports how the space is actually used. And when lighting is doing its job properly, you don't really notice it. You just notice that the room feels better. And the easiest way to start is to turn the overhead light off, and then light the room from below. A floor lamp next to the sofa, a table lamp on a side table or console, because when light comes from around eye level when you're seated, the room feels softer and less exposed, and that harsh all at once feeling just disappears. Then, after you have the room well lit from below, you can use the overhead light again to help you see clearly when you're walking, but let everything else stay dimmer, because furniture height lighting creates a sense of comfort and intention that ceiling lights simply can't on their own. And I promise you, this single change can transform a room in a matter of minutes. Next, figure out where you actually need to see clearly and where you just want the room to feel relaxed. That generally means having one or two lights lighting the sofa where you read, the path you walk through, or the chair you sit in, and then let the other lights be softer and less direct, just glowing against a wall or filling a corner without fully lighting it up. Now, you don't want every light on at full brightness, because when everything is equally bright, the room feels tiring. But when some areas are dimmer, your brain naturally knows where to focus and where to relax. And that contrast is what makes your room feel deeper and more comfortable without changing anything else. And this is why I say lighting is such a fast way to transform your space, because it changes how the room behaves without changing the room itself. And by the way, this is also why I built my lighting tool, which instantly tells you what kind of lighting you should add to your space, where to position it, and how to create a warm, cozy atmosphere you love spending time in. I won't go into all the details here, but some of the images I just showed you, like these two, the before image is just one that I found online, but the after image was created by the tool. So if you want to try it out and upload your own images to see how changing your lighting lighting would transform your room, there's a link in the description. Now, once the lighting is working, the next thing you usually notice is that your room feels mostly good, but it still feels a little unfinished around the edges. The middle of the room has a purpose, and the furniture makes sense, but the corners feel like they were forgotten. Not necessarily wrong, just forgotten. And that matters more than most people realize, because corners are actually a pretty important part of your room. And when they're bare, the space can feel hollow even if everything else seems done. And this is why plants are such a cheat code, because plants don't just add color to your room, though they certainly do that. They also add presence. They bring height, softness, and a sense of movement to rooms full of stationary furniture. And unlike anything else, plants change how a room feels immediately because you're introducing something alive into an otherwise static space. But a tall plant in an empty corner does a lot more than just fill that space. It anchors that part of the room and pulls your eye upward, which makes the ceiling feel higher and the layout feel more balanced. So instead of the room fading out at the corners, it feels really well held together. And you'd be surprised at how much just doing that changes how the entire room feels. But not every corner needs something so large. And in some spaces, vertical emphasis works better than floor coverage, and so a vase with branches sitting on a console or pedestal can achieve the same effect of adding height and movement to the room without taking up so much space. The natural shape of the branches softens any surrounding hard lines and just adds some life where things feel overly stiff. Now, in tighter rooms, grouping plants together usually works better than spreading them out. 2 or 3 plants at different heights give a corner some weight and just make it feel deliberate. And with a mix of different leaf shapes and textures, you create depth, which naturally draws your eye and creates some visual interest in an otherwise boring corner. And this is why plants outperform so many other types of decor. Hard objects sit still and ask for attention, but plants do the opposite. They absorb visual noise and make a room feel calmer just by being there. And that's why plants work so well for fast transformations. You're not redecorating the room, you're just giving the edges something to hold on to. And once the edges of your space feel alive, the whole room feels more put together. Now, once the lighting is right and you've injected some life into your home, the next thing you'll want to pay attention to are all the flat surfaces. Because kitchens, bathrooms, and vanities, they often have strong bones, but if the details haven't been done well, they just blend together and get forgotten. And that's because cabinetry takes up a huge amount of visual space, but the only thing breaking it up is its hardware. But when the hardware is generic or barely noticeable, your eye just has nothing to grab onto, so even if the layout is fine, the whole space feels pretty basic. And so the fastest way to change that is with a bit of contrast. On light cabinets or natural wood, darker hardware gives the doors an edge they didn't have before. Now, instead of everything blurring together, each door and drawer starts to stand out on its own. And that changes how the whole room feels, because now you can follow the cabinets instead of skipping over them. They feel clearer, more solid, and more thought through. So it's a small detail, but it's often the difference between cabinets that fade into the background and cabinets that feel like they actually belong in the room. And on darker cabinets, warmer metals do the opposite. They add relief and stop the space from feeling heavy. But the point here isn't decoration, it's definition, because good hardware helps you understand the shape of the cabinetry in a quick glance. But scale matters here too, because handles that are too small basically disappear, and when they disappear, the entire cabinet loses presence. But just adding in slightly larger handles give the doors weight, and even the simplest cabinets start to feel more substantial when the hardware has some scale. And this is also why hardware swaps work so well when you're short on time, because you're not tearing anything out or committing to a big renovation. You're just changing the things you touch every day. And once you do, your cabinets will stop fading into the background of your home and start feeling finished, even though nothing else changed. Now, by this point, the room usually feels better, but it might still feel a little tight. Not cluttered, just contained. And that's often because your space is only being experienced from one direction. So when you look around the room, your eye just hits a wall and stops with nothing pulling it forward or outward. But that's where mirrors come in, not as decoration, but as a way to extend how the room feels. Because mirrors don't actually make a room bigger, but they do change how your eye travels through it. And when your gaze can move more freely, your space immediately feels more open. Now, the mistake most people make with mirrors is treating them like art. They hang one because there's an empty wall or because the mirror itself looks interesting. But when a mirror doesn't reflect anything meaningful, it doesn't do much to help the room, and instead, it just becomes another object on the wall. So a reframe I've found helpful around mirrors is this. Don't focus on the mirror itself, focus on what it's reflecting. Because a mirror only helps a room when when it's reflecting something that already improves the space. And that could be a lot of different things. Light coming in from a nearby window, a lamp softly lighting a table, or even just a nice stretch of wall. Because when that reflection hits the right spot, it pulls light further into the room and keeps your eye moving instead of stopping at the wall. And it's that movement that makes a space feel so much more open. And this is why mirrors work especially well across from windows or near light sources, because they extend the reach of what's already there instead of trying to create something new. And so when you think about mirrors this way, placement becomes more important than size or shape, because the mirror isn't meant to be the feature, it's meant to support the rest of the room by repeating what already works. Now, the next move I want to talk about is especially useful when you're renting and can't make permanent changes to your space. And specifically, I'm talking about peel and stick tiles and wallpaper. Now, before you crucify me in the comments, let me be clear. I know peel and stick doesn't offer nearly the same feeling as real tiles and real wallpaper. You don't have to be a genius to know that. But if you are renting and aren't quite happy with your space, peel and stick can actually be a pretty good option for you. So I want to show you what it looks like, because for some people, this is exactly what they need to take their space to the next level. Because instead of working next to a plain wall or an uninspiring backsplash, peel and stick lets you give that surface a new identity without any renovation. And you can inject color, texture, and patterns in an instant, which shifts the entire mood of the space. So what felt blank and boring in the morning can become the focal point of the room by the end of the day. So in kitchens, this works best on backsplashes that are already sitting behind your functional zones. A subtle tile pattern catches light and adds depth in a way that paint alone can't. And because these areas are framed by cabinets and counters, the change feels built right into the space. And so the surface starts to feel finished, even though nothing structural has changed. Now, if you're going with a pattern, that's where you want to be a little more thoughtful. Bold patterns work best when the rest of the room stays calm. So if you've got simple cabinets, neutral finishes, and clean lines, that's what lets a pattern do its job. Because instead of fighting the room, the balance gives the room energy through contrast. And if you just apply the pattern to one surface or wall, it creates a clear moment without overwhelming the rest of the space. And then peel and stick wallpaper is generally best for smaller, contained rooms like bathrooms. Because these spaces are already separate from the rest of the home, they can handle a bit more personality without throwing everything else off. So don't be afraid to go a little bolder than you normally would here, because the worst case scenario is you just remove it and try something else. But if you get it right, you can completely reset how the room feels in an afternoon. So what makes this approach powerful is that it keeps you out of the loop of endless tweaking, because most people make changes to their home like they're swatting flies. Something feels off, so they add something new, and then something else feels off, so they add again. And over time, the room gets busier, not better. But what we're doing is closer to editing, because most of the time, the problem isn't that your room needs more stuff, it just needs more clarity. And that's what design really is. Not shopping, but editing. It's deciding what gets emphasized, what gets softened, and what gets to disappear into the background so your room finally feels good. Because when those decisions have been made, your space stops feeling like a project and starts feeling like home. So if you want to make this repeatable, so you can walk into any room and know what to do first, what to do next, and what to ignore completely, you're going to want to watch this video next, where I walk you through a system I've developed for making any home feel fresh and beautiful. I'll see you there.